Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, we're going to call this meeting to order, and the first order of business is first readers, and the chair recognizes Representative McKillop to tell us about his House Bill 621. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before the committee today House Bill 621. It is an earned income tax credit. It mirrors the federal earned income tax credit, but limits it to 5% of whatever amount someone can claim on their federal earned income tax credit. It's an exciting tax bill. It's non-refundable, as they all are, Mr. Chairman, exciting tax bill. It is non-refundable, and so it does not actually pay out money from the state. It merely reduces a Georgia taxpayer's tax liability on earned income. That is what this bill does, is it encourages folks who don't make a lot of money to keep their job. It is a tax break for the poor, working, employed individuals in Georgia. I'm happy to explain it. It kicks in at or below the poverty level. At the poverty level, say for a family of four at about $19,000, it would be roughly $200 tax credit against their State of Georgia Department of Revenue tax liability. It phases out to 235% of poverty, so it phases out from there to about $45,000, at which point it's zero. We do have a fiscal note on it. In fiscal year 2010, it would be about $50 million. I've looked through the questions that the committee often has and believe that it does reduce the size of government. As we have learned lately, less revenue equals less government, and so this would certainly reduce the size of government. It reduces the tax burden on working Georgians by $50 million. It increases personal responsibility because it does encourage you to have a job as opposed to just living on any kind of state assistance or federal assistance. And it promotes traditional family structure. In my personal experience, there's less marital strife when there's more money in the household, and so I think it encourages less marital strife and therefore less termination of marriages. So I believe that it does meet the requirements of tax bills. I'll be happy to answer any questions about the bill.
Well, if the gentleman will yield, we do have a question, Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative McKillop, I saw the fiscal note at $50 million. That seems a bit high. Do you agree that that's a reasonable amount, or do you think that's in line?
I would generally take the Department of Audits and Accounts at their word. They based it on the federal payout from Georgia, which was $2 billion, and that included both the credit and a refundable portion. And if you figure that roughly half of that amount and then 5% of that amount, it ends up being right about $50 million. I have not looked at it myself, but have just gone by what the fiscal note says.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative McKillop. We will assign that legislation that seems familiar from years past to our Income Tax Subcommittee, and you can contact chairs James Mills, Alan Peake, or David Knight. Either of those three gentlemen will make sure you get a hearing expeditiously at your convenience on that legislation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. We now have a quorum. Officially call the rest of the full committee to, after the first readers are concluded, to order. And I got a quasi-promise it might very well be, if we go ahead and call him first, the last time we have to deal with Representative Lindsay this year. But we're waiting on a sub, so we can't even do that. We have to look at you this whole time. Okay. If you don't mind, then I'll go down to House Bill 186. Chair recognizes Chairman Chuck Martin to tell us about his teleworking bill, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the Chair will allow me to present from my seat, I'll go ahead with that. House Bill 186, LC 1878-76, we bring to ask for an extension in the telework to 2012. For the committee will recall, we passed this with a sunset and with cap. So we asked the committee to move that out. It has been tremendously successful in its first year. Even though we passed it several years ago, it was just this year when the credits were actually given because of the way the department needs to deal with it to make sure they're fair and equitable to all taxpayers. But would say this is a good plan given our transportation woes around the state and especially in Metro Atlanta to allow people to continue to use it. It doesn't change any parts or implementation mechanisms, just simply an extension of the date, and a slight increase in the amount of credits available each year from $2 million to $2.5 million.
Chairman yield for. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Were you
Yes, sir.
finished? Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Would you yield for question?
Yes, sir.
The chair recognizes Chairman Rice.
Chairman Martin, I just was wondering what the metric that's used for success in terms of the return on investment for this particular exemption.
Well, there are some specific metrics that and I forget the organization, Chairman Rice. There's a group that promotes teleworking in Georgia. I'm looking around. They have a metric that they have used in the past. I would simply say in this case there was $2.5 million worth of credits applied for, $2 million were given, and I think 1.6 were actually awarded because of the expenditures. So a number of workers were kept off the road, and I think the metric they are using was something on the order of I'm going to be hesitant. I think it was like 1,000 to 1 in terms of the return on the dollar of an actual credit here. It might have been a bit less than that to the dollars that would need to have been spent on sticks and bricks to improve an intersection or a freeway to get those people there.
Isn't it true? I support your bill. I'm just really trying to figure out on all the exemptions whether or not
Sure.
continuation is in order based upon some cost-benefit analysis.
Yes, sir. And I think with the oversubscription and the fact that this is limited to only a one-time shot per employee to basically incentivize folks to do this, if you will, get the ball rolling, we would hope that this extension would get that done in Atlanta along with our transportation issues around the state. There are other congested areas that would benefit as well. Thank you.
I don't see any other further questions. What's the will of the committee? I have a motion to pass and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. You can now deal with that wonderful, affable rules chairman on that bill, Mr. Chairman. Martin, could you also, from your place, tell us about House Bill 358, sir?
358, Mr. Chairman, is an extension to an exemption for sales tax that this committee passed a few years ago, and it seeks to move from 2009 to 2011 the exemption on sales tax for prepared food and beverages that are donated to nonprofits. Just in brief, if the committee remembers, some years ago, the Revenue Department noticed that there was actually a coordinated effort to take food that had been prepared in restaurants around Atlanta that was not used but perfectly good and donate that to folks that were helping the hungry and the homeless. And because they were donating that and there was it was being used, the department felt inclined to charge a use tax. So it was a situation where if no good deed goes unpunished. If you donated this to the food banks, you had to pay a use tax. If you threw it in the dumpster and just threw it away, you didn't owe tax. So what this exemption does is let people continue to help those in need. There's very little cost to the state considering the amount of food that is actually made available to help people. Ask the committee's extension.
I don't see any questions. What's the will of the committee? I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign, and passes unanimously. That'll be in rules as
Thank
well.
you, Mr. Chairman. I need to go do an appropriations meeting.
You're excused. Thank you very much, Chairman. We do now have in our midst House Bill 129. Representative Lindsay, tell us all about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a simple bill dealing with Zoo Atlanta. As those of you who serve on the subcommittee will recall, that Zoo Atlanta is undergoing a renovation and expansion project that will last over the next 6 years. We've simply asked for a 2-year assistance when it comes to state sales tax, and then if the committee in 2 years feels it's appropriate, we'll come back and ask for an addition. But right now we're doing it 2 years at a time. Basically what we're doing with over the next 2 years is the amphibian and reptile complex, which is about a $9 million project, as well as an expansion and renovation of the animal hospital located at Zoo Atlanta. This bill has the united support, bipartisan support of the Atlanta delegation. It is bipartisan because my name is on it. It's basically me and my good friends, my good 14 Democratic friends from the Atlanta delegation, and I believe I've given you a letter to that effect. We do have a proposed committee substitute, LC 8255S, for you to consider. Representative Flood may recall that we had a discussion as to whether or not the City of Atlanta would be participating in terms of the sales tax relief. The City of Atlanta has elected not to participate, and so we have put in language specifically exempting them out. That's essentially the bill, Mr. Chairman. The impact over the next 2 years, the fiscal impact you have statement is $800,000 over a 6-year period of time. It's estimated just over a 2-year period of time, somewhere between $200,000 to $300,000.
So we're just being asked to eliminate the state portion. Is there a name change in here? Should be the Not Anymore Atlanta City Zoo?
We'll come back with a proposed name change perhaps in the future. Right now, it's Zoo Atlanta, which is, as the committee is well aware, has a great impact upon the impact not only of the City of Atlanta but also the entire state, and does a great service to the children of the state as well. We
certainly agree with you. It's a great facility. Representative Flood.
At the proper time, I'd like to be recognized for a motion.
You certainly may. 25, who's that? Representative Talton.
Just a question.
Yes,
why
sir.
wouldn't Atlanta want to participate since it's in the heart of Atlanta?
I think that they're concerned about the financial impact during this period of time. I'm hoping that by the time we get through the Senate, I can get them back into the boat, but right now they're concerned about it, and they haven't been willing to sign on to it yet. And we're coming up on day 30, and my pledge to the subcommittee was that until the City of Atlanta formally signed on, I wouldn't include them in the bill. But I'm still working on them through the Senate, and hopefully by the time we get through the Senate, I can get them on board.
Chair recognizes Representative Flood for the purpose of a motion.
Before I make the motion, can I just comment that the City of Atlanta already has a vested interest in the zoo, but I'd like to be recognized too. I'd like to move this do pass on this motion.
I have a motion and a second. I think I had somebody else that wanted a second, but that just jump right on in there anytime you're ready. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, what's all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign.
Thank you, Mr.
Being
Chairman.
our rules, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Lenz. It's been a great year with you.
I've enjoyed it.
That's all right. Is there anybody here to present a bill that has time restraints that needs to ask for a special? Anyone? Nobody? Wow. Is anybody awake? Okay, Representative Knight, are you here? Yes. What is your number? You recognize to tell the committee about House Bill 334 about electronic filing, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bring before you House Bill 334, which lowers the e-pay threshold. This legislature and during the off session, there's been discussion about how to do this, and we think we've come up with the best way to do this. This bill lowers in a 2-year phase-in the threshold for e-pay of sales tax, withholding tax, or fiduciary taxes from $5,000 to $500. The first year, which will be next year, it will be lowered in the 2010 year to $1,000, and then in the following year, after January 1, 2011, to $500. This bill provides, I think, one of the best, makes the department the most efficient. It reduces the administrative costs and the time required for processing checks, the e-filing returns, and it reduces the turnaround, most of all, to our distribution of our sales taxes back to our local governments. And it also provides for the penalties for failure to do this, which is the greater of 25% or 5%, and we also, for those who do not follow the law, they will lose their vendor compensation, which, as you know, Georgia pays one of the highest vendor compensations to our businesses who collect this tax on our behalf. It's a great bill, and we've got support of our municipalities and our counties out there, and we ask for your favorable support.
After hearing your presentation, it brings back to memory that saying I got in college that you're only in accounting school because you don't have enough personality to be an engineer.
Thank you, Mr.
That sure was dynamic, Representative Knight. Are there any there any Can anybody calm down long enough to ask any questions? I don't see any. What's the pleasure of the committee? I have a motion do pass. Is there a second? A second. Any further discussion? 9. Who's that? Yes, sir.
Just one question, and I realize that this is not part of the amendment, but is there any particular reason why it's the commissioner may require than the commissioner shall require?
What line are you on?
11 and 20.
I think that's allowing the commissioner probably to make exceptions when warranted. Further on the bill, there are provisions which the commissioner may grant waivers under hardships. So I think that's why there is the permissive language.
It has to be permissive to allow them. There would be hardships where there's no availability of any phone or computer, probably. There could be some retail activity and some honest tax collectors force where the commissioner can look at it on a case-by-case basis and deal reasonably. It's a good question, though. Any further questions, members? We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Passes unanimously. Now that you got us all worked up, Representative Knight, you want to talk about House Bill 335, please, sir.
Yes, sir. House Bill 335 is the Improved Taxpayer Customer Service Bill. This is a good piece of legislation, I think, on behalf of Georgia taxpayers, and it sort of goes back giving the edge to our taxpayers. There are two parts of the bill that are very similar, Section 2 and in Section 5. Basically, these are currently the department, when they serve a subpoena or a notice, must do it via either the sheriff or through a marshal's, the marshal department. And what this does is put a provision in that the department can send via mail or commercial package delivery, FedEx or UPS, the first attempt to do a subpoena. And this is, quite frankly, I think, saving the citizens some embarrassment out there in Georgia. If this doesn't work, then the department will follow back up with its method of subpoena through either the marshal or the sheriff's department. Those are those two sections. Section 3 expands the refund claim rights. Currently, there's only one option for our payers to go in and request a refund. This is allowing a second method where the taxpayer can apply going back to the dealer first, and if that doesn't work, they still have their current option of going back through the Department of Revenue. Again, we're adding options in for our businesses out there. Good piece of legislation. And the last one is expanding refund claim protest rights. Currently, the only way a taxpayer, if a taxpayer fails to request administrative hearing, their only avenue right now is in the Superior Court, and this amendment gives the taxpayers the right to file an administrative protest upon that denial. Again, another choice, another option for the taxpayers of Georgia. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
As I look at each section, it looks to me like every single one is designed to save taxpayers money, save taxpayers time, and afford a more efficient way to comply with the various and very complex tax laws. And
Absolutely.
I think this is in conjunction with the department and this General Assembly. And I agree with you. This is excellent legislation that takes out some very unnecessary expenses now that are sort of a burden on our citizens. And I commend the department for their assistance with this. Do we have any questions? Recognized for a motion.
Move to pass, Mr. Chairman.
The motion is second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Carries unanimously. Sorry. Representative T. Would you do the mic? We can't hear you. I'm sorry. There you go.
I'm sorry. This is 335, right? It says on the last page that once the governor signed, this is going to be retroactive.
Do you have your bill in front of you, Representative Knight?
The question again?
Section 6 is. That's Section 6 deals with, it's now a requirement if you're going to take a credit for confirmation. Is this the one about the electronic filing for student scholarship? If you're going to take you get a credit for that, but you have to attach a certificate that you accomplished whatever you had to do for the scholarship. That's the reason we wanted to make this retroactive, because people that don't file electronically or not, or that had filed electronically, were not able to take that credit. So they were forced to do a more expensive and arduous paper return. This allows even the ones back in 2008, subject to audit, to make sure they got that credit for the student scholarships, if there were any for them. So for that one section, it was retroactive for folks that were entitled to that credit.
Mr. Chairman, you are correct. If I may add, that's like we did with the
driver's license,
the driver's education program, the certificate. Same principle.
Again, just so we don't have to penalize innocent taxpayers that are trying to do the right thing, and they couldn't otherwise. They wanted to file electronically, but you can't attach a piece of paper to an electronic filing. So now you've got that option in the law for that. But that's a good question. Thank you for raising it. Okay, Representative Knight, you're recognized, if you would, for House Bill 444, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 444 is the fraudulent preparer penalty bill, and I want to say on behalf of my profession and all the other professional preparers out there, I think this bill is a good bill for our profession. Over the last couple of years, especially as our electronic filing has become more prominent, we've seen a lot of people who seek to gain not only the state, but also are taking advantage of the taxpayers out there in preparing these returns. And I think this is going to hopefully weed out some of these bad apples that we have here. Basically, there's two sections. One section deals with the unreasonable tax return position that's a penalty of $500. And basically, this is looking at the professionals who understand the regulations and who are out there preparing the returns. They should know better. But the second section, I think, is going out to the ones that we've seen on TV, the cases that have been brought to our attention, where we've got people intentionally going out there and trying to game the system, our state and the preparers. And it puts in a very strict penalty for the willful attempt, the willful and reckless intention to disregard rules and regulations. So it's a good bill, and on behalf of the preparers, I think it protects the profession, and it's going to protect our taxpayers out there. I ask you for favorable consideration.
Okay, I think coming from a CPA, that's pretty strong words. You're willing to abide by it. It's going to be binding on your vocation. Are there any questions for Representative Knight? I don't see any. We have. We're going to have a motion and a second, and then we're going to need to consider an amendment that. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Now, further discussion.
Yes, Chairman, in subcommittee, we had an amendment to this bill. On page 2, line 49, we struck the semicolon and the word or, and we added in and a. And struck the number 2 on line 50.
Wait a minute, we didn't say and a. We said and.
I'm sorry. Yes, and.
So you're your amendment to this committee is to strike the word "or" and add the word "and" in its place.
Yes, sir.
Is that
And I
correct?
think we removed, is that the colon or semicolon?
I think the semicolon
Yeah.
would probably remain.
Okay.
It stays. So let me state that again. Remove the word "or" on line 49 and replace therewith the word "and."
Yes, sir. That is the amendment.
That's the amendment. Is there any objection to the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment's in. Now we have a motion and a second as amended. Any further discussion? Chairman Rice. Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries as amended. That bill will be in rules. Thank you, Chairman Knight, for the night package that we had today. That was a lot of work. Thank you, sir. All good stuff. All right, the chair recognizes the distinguished vice chairman of this committee and chairman laureate of what we used to call journals. It's information technology now because of the high level of sophistication of the chair thereof. If you would, tell us about House Bill 67.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring to you House Bill 67, and this is the, we first started off, this bill was took away the exemption on food and replaced it with a sales tax credit. We've worked on this very, very hard for the last almost 3 weeks now, trying to get it through both our hierarchy and through the committee itself. What we've done now is we have replaced the credit with a tax credit now that you can place against the IRS. Let me get my bill straight here. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. The qualified food expense by the IRS, and you'll multiply that monthly rate times 12 to get the actual amount of food purchased during the year, and you can take 4% of that as a tax credit on your income tax filed each year. These credits will now be carried forward. If your tax liability is $100 and you have $150 in credits, you could carry the $50 forward to the next year, and so on. That's basically what this bill does, and that is where we are now. I will stand for any questions now, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions for the presenter? I think most everybody's seen this in subcommittee because it's been debated hours and hours. Any questions? I don't see any. What's the will of the committee? A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion? What? Excuse me. Representative
No,
Floyd.
I'm sorry. That's inadvertent.
Okay. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? 2, 3. I better get a hand count. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, like sign? It's 8-5. In favor of the motion, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Did I see Representative Graves come in? Yeah, there you are. Chair recognizes you to tell us about House Bill 481. Please, sir. If you're ready. Are you ready? There you go. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm excited to bring to the committee 481. It's been a great process over the past couple of weeks working with so many members of this committee, the General Assembly, and business owners all across the state, and trying to decide what is the best way that we can create new jobs for Georgians during these challenging days. And we've come up with a great proposal that I think Georgia will be proud of. That'll move us towards an economy recovery in the economy much quicker than any other state in the nation. I must say at first on the outset that there's been a lot of work and a lot of help from Secretary of State's office, as well as the Commissioner of Labor, Michael Thurman, and in addition to working with the Governor's office. So we appreciate all the efforts that have been put into this. This bill is broken up into several sections, and each section has been handled by a different member. So I'd like for them to explain their section if it comes to that, if you'd allow that opportunity, Mr. Chairman. But basically, the first part of the bill provides what we would call a new business holiday, and creating a suspension of certain fees for the creation of new businesses. Then after that is a credit for businesses who hire individuals off of unemployment, and a credit towards their unemployment insurance, and that was Mike Cohen on that, and I'll explain that when we get to that point. And then the next section would be the gradual elimination of corporate income tax. That's been championed by Representative Roberts here to my right. And then another income tax credit of $2,400 for individuals who are hired and kept on for a certain period of time. That's Representative Stevens. And then the last section deals with the sales tax deposit, and that was Representative Martin Scott. And I failed to mention that was Representative Mark Hamilton that's handling sections 2, 3, and 4, which is the sales tax holiday.
I think we'll handle it this way. If you don't mind yielding for any questions first, and then I'll let, as we always have as a policy, at the discussion phase, any of those members that want to explain a particular section more thoroughly than you did, then they can be recognized to do so.
Sure.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Are there any questions for Representative Graves on the general bill, what he just presented? Yes, sir. Representative Powell.
Yes, sir. Can I ask you a question about a specific section, or should I wait till the author?
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay. In Section 8, which deals with the basically the advance payment of sales tax, and I understand what the purpose of it is. My only question is in a typical deposit situation where you're making a deposit for your utilities after a certain amount of time where you have been in compliance, paid bills timely, then a lot of times the utility provider will refund your deposit, but they can later require that you put up a deposit if you start paying late or not paying at all. And I guess my question is, was there any thought given to making this only effective as to people who had filed on a timely basis, paid on a timely basis, and perhaps putting it back into effect if somebody misses 2 returns or a return or something to that effect, so that the department doesn't lose money by the fact that people do get behind?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Do you mind if Representative Scott answers that? He's been working on this for many years now, I think.
16, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, Representative Powell, that's a great question. I think probably the way that we're looking at this is from the other perspective. We're saying to businesses in Georgia that we're not going to collect the money until it's actually, we're not going to collect the money from you until you've actually collected it from the retailer, and we're going to allow the penalty side to take care of those who decide not to pay. So there's already consequences built into the code for those who refuse to hand over the money that's owed to the state, money that's actually already been taxed, and obviously they're just holding it as a fiduciary. And so we're going to leave that on the penalty side for those who've decided to not to pay later, and obviously there are pretty severe consequences for that.
Thanks.
Okay, are there any further questions for Representative Graves? I don't see any. Are there any members of the committee which wish to be heard? Any sections of the bill or otherwise? Representative Flood, I think you were first to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess have a question of the author, and that is, if he could, I hope the members have looked at the fiscal note on this bill, because I think clearly there's a kind of an eye-popping number as you look through the calculations. I've been scratching my head trying to figure out all of this, and clearly there is an interest by members of this committee, and certainly by this representative, to do all that we can to stimulate business interest in the state of Georgia. We certainly have to do all we can to encourage businesses to locate here and to hire people and to continue to invest in their businesses and their business enterprises. My question is sort of at what extent. If we just looked at the impact for 2010, if we took all the sections together, it's a total of $350 million just in 2010 alone. In 2011, it's another $93 million. In 2012, it's $578 million just in 2012 alone. In 2015, it's another $326 million. And by the time we get out to 2020, it's $945 million, which is close to $1 billion. The corporate income tax alone gives me some pause because in the next 10 years we will have exempted about $3.1 billion in income. And to what extent? As I looked at some research, California and Nevada have also implemented a zero corporate income tax. And they've gotten back for every dollar that they've spent in tax credits, they've gotten back 18 cents. And so I would ask, how is that justified? How is that a justified return on investment when you spend a dollar to get 18 cents back?
Do you wish to respond to that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you taking time to look the fiscal note, and we've reviewed that. And I'll tell you, there are portions of that fiscal note that I think any member of this committee would have to question. And specifically, the concept that the reducing of the corporate income tax would not stimulate any kind of future benefit to the state. You have to recognize that the fiscal note takes a static approach to anything. It doesn't assume any dynamics whatsoever. And so while you've mentioned certain numbers, let's take, for instance, the sales tax deposit. If and I assume that was in part of your 2010 calculation,
yes,
because other than that, there's really not much in 2010. That is money that is on deposit with the state of Georgia. It's not revenue to the state of Georgia. It is money that is held, that is working capital of business owners all across this state. And it's held on deposit by the state of Georgia and kept out of the hands of hard-working men and women who are operating businesses and trying right now, quite frankly, to stay open. And so to consider that a cost to the state is remarkable to me, because there is no cost to the state. The only money or resources that the state has comes from the taxpayer. So anytime you use the word cost, you're saying we're giving back to the taxpayer. And so I wish the fiscal notes, quite frankly, would say, this isn't a cost to the state, this is actually returned to the taxpayer, because that's quite truly what it is. And so when we look at the fiscal note, I think you've got to take some of that into consideration. Plus, some things have changed in the substitute, and I didn't mention it, Mr. Chairman, but we were going off LC 0078S. And let me bring up on corporate income tax, if I could. If you notice in there, they used as a baseline for the corporate income tax calculations 2008, and then assumed a consistent growth pattern from that date forward. And I have to ask, since 2008, I believe the corporate income tax is projected to have declined 27%. The last 2 months has been negative for the state of Georgia. So why would we look at that and assume that that's the right baseline point in which to project from? So anyhow, that'd be my response. But I believe any time that we can make an investment back into the businesses of Georgia, who are the true job creators, they're the only job creators we have, that are sustainable jobs for Georgians, I think it's the right investment.
Further inquiry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
As I understand it, there are no states in the region that have zero corporate income tax in the Southeast. Is that correct?
Right.
So while this might put us at a competitive advantage, at some point it puts a significant strain on the already very weak budget of the state. And the return on that investment is still very limited. I'll take your comment about the $186 million that's on deposit as not being a true expense, but when you look at just the corporate income tax alone, we're taking a significant hit over the course of 10 years for very little in return, and with no real incentive to do that, since none of our neighboring states, I believe there are only 2 states that have implemented a zero income tax, besides
No, we would be number 5.
Five.
And can I respond, Mr. Chairman?
As soon as he's finished, let him finish.
Yeah. So if you could help me understand the reason for going to zero in corporate income tax.
Mm-hmm. Corporate income tax it only makes up approximately about 3% of our budget right now. However, you talk about a deterrent to businesses who want to move to a business-friendly state. The corporate income tax is a deterrent. We are higher than most of the states around us. And I think right now in such a competitive market, I mean, you talk about a competitive business market and climate in the United States, it's time to put Georgia at the forefront of that competitiveness. And so eliminating to zero, I think, is a smart, long-term, decision that we're making, or sending a message that this isn't anything drastic. We're talking about $51 million a year, based on the projections of where we're going to be, which is an investment that we've made in conservation land purchases, an investment we've made in educational scholarship. It's the same investment we've made in reservoirs. It's less than we've made in trauma care, and yet we can't seem to think that's enough, or it's too much to make in creating jobs in Georgia.
One final question, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Where do you propose to make up the difference with the lost revenue?
I don't think you'll see anywhere in here that you'll see that I'm proposing anything myself. But what I believe what I'm suggesting, and I think the General Assembly is going to suggest, is that we have the confidence and the belief in the citizens of this state that if we empower them and the businesses of this state, that the state will grow, we'll have sustainable job growth, and we'll be the beacon of the entire country in the next few years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I suspect that debate will remain spirited all the way through the floor. Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't take very long. I did want to mention Section 7 and only the fact that our state's in trouble. And this particular section does one thing only, and that's get people back to work by placing an incentive for those employees that have been unemployed for 60 days. And if they remain employed for 2 years or 24 months, the employer receives a $2,400 tax credit. And that's essentially all that this particular section does. And it's a back-to-work incentive bill for employees and employers.
Thank you, sir. Representative Rashad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you say that the Commissioner of Labor is supporting this? Did I misunderstand?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think that's one of the tremendous aspects of this legislation, that it's not partisan in any way. It's not the House or the Senate or the Governor's office. It is the leadership of this state's and intent to provide whatever mechanisms we can to create jobs in Georgia. So you'll see in Section 5 an incredible, what I believe is a great work that has come out of this process, and much of it from the Department of Labor's office, and that it sets up work credits and basically gives the department the opportunity to provide quarterly credits to businesses who employ somebody who's receiving unemployment benefits currently at an amount no less than $25 and an amount no greater than $125 per employee for 4 consecutive quarters.
And then one
and
final question, because I like several parts of this bill, to be honest. There's some that I don't, but do you have any idea how many jobs this may save or create? I mean, has there been any study to say that this could, I hear all the time on the national level, this bill's going to create 3 million jobs. Right. I mean, do we have any idea how many this could save or create? I guess is my question.
I think that'd just be speculation only to say that, but I guess the question we have to ask ourselves, how many will be saved if we do nothing? And I think these are proposals that are put in place that are not industry specific in any way. They are global entirely, with the intent to provide jobs for Georgians. But I wish I could give you a specific
number. Great question. If you get an answer to what kind of statistic for saving jobs, I'd love to hear that, because heard that same promise at the national level, yet more unemployment claims since the recession. So I'm curious as how many we saved out of all of that. But that's a great question. If we find out some methodology, I'd really be interested to know that. Let me see. Representative Teague.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see. So the return to the state would be 18% on each dollar invested. Therefore, could you tell me, since we can't say how many jobs it would create, and we don't know what type of jobs we're going to create, then would we, any way we could possibly put something in here to raise the minimum wage, so the person that would be working would not still be living below the level in which is equitable for a person to receive a salary? Since you said that the Department of Labor supports this, and there are a lot of people that are working that can't afford to really have their clothes clean because they're working for the Georgia Standard Minimum Wage, which is the federal minimum wage. So what can we do to work it out where the person that gets employed by these persons, because I'm not looking for slave labor or indentured services. So what can we do to sell this package to say, yes, we're doing something for unemployed people in Georgia. You will be able to pay your house note, work out something to something with your mortgage company, because you're going to make enough money to be able to catch up after Georgia has invested this kind of money.
Well, you bring up a great question. It's Mr. Chairman, Mike.
Go ahead.
And something that many members have taken into consideration. I think you'll see the Department of Labor took that into consideration. They have a requirement that the person must be employed for a minimum of 30 hours per week, as well as nothing. They have to receive more than, I think another section, more than they would receive as the average monthly unemployment benefits. So if somebody's receiving unemployment benefits, this bill would say an employer would not get any benefit unless they paid you more than that. So I think that's a great way to move forward in exactly what you're talking about, so that people have sustainable wages.
If you'll stand
in
by.
Georgia we have a very low unemployment rate, so more wouldn't be much. In 30 hours you wouldn't get insurance. So we haven't really done very much for people who are unemployed. If this is what
I'd suggest that being unemployed and receiving no wages and being employed and having 30 hours would be much better.
We have homeless people that work 1 and 2 jobs, and they're still homeless, cannot afford a place to live. So for me, to go back to my constituents, I want to be able to say, yes, you'll be able to get a decent job at a decent wage, 40 hours a week, where you can get paid for your own insurance, where the state can stop saying, I'm taking care of you. And this isn't doing that. This is not the vehicle for that. If it's just 30 hours a week, you need to at least work 40. So can somebody help me with that? Since I'm sure there's more than one person that's dealt with this, I'm sure you understand it.
Right. Well, that
I've
was
only been here a few years. I really need to see something that would give me, but I would be able to take to my constituents and say, yes, you can work 40 hours a week, you can get insurance, then you'll be able to work out something with your mortgage company to be able to pay your house note and possibly stay in it. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm looking for when you give this type of...
I can tell you...
Maybe an adoption.
Yeah, strictly what I'm trying to address here is the over 400,000 Georgians who don't have a job and who do not have income. And this bill is specifically designed to move them into a position in which they earn an income. And Commissioner Thurman is the one who put the minimum requirement of 30 hours. It has to be at least 30 hours or more, of course, but in order to get individuals back to work. And we have to be cautious, I think, in talking about minimum wage, because the intent is to get individuals employed and hired. And if we impose any kind of wage requirement, I think you discourage the employment of people. So that's a difficult balance.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to suspend the debate here. This room is taken at 4 o'clock, so we're going to have to suspend and then head on over to 133 is all I know is what we can do. The transportation folks are waiting here, so hopefully we can take everything with you if you don't mind, and we'll pick up right where we left off.